Everyone has moments in life they can't just stop thinking about. They can be embarrassing things, like that one time you face planted in front of a group of teenagers, or something amazing like the first time you hosted your family for the holidays. And on Baby, This is Keke Palmer, hosted by me, Keke Palmer, and presented by BMW, we know to savor the good memories and let go of the bad. And one thing everyone remembers fondly is their first time behind the wheel of a BMW. So come join me and BMW this summer as we explore pop culture moments and topics you just can't stop thinking about on Baby, This is Keke Palmer, sponsored by BMW, the ultimate driving machine.
As a person with a very deep voice, I'm hired all the time for advertising campaigns. But a deep voice doesn't sell B2B, and advertising on the wrong platform doesn't sell B2B either. That's why if you're a B2B marketer, you should use LinkedIn ads. LinkedIn has the targeting capabilities to help you reach the world's largest professional audience. That's right, over 70 million decision makers all in one place. All the big wigs, then medium wigs, also small wigs who are on the path to becoming big wigs. Okay, that's enough about wigs. LinkedIn ads allows you to focus on getting your B2B message to the right people. So, does that mean you should use ads on LinkedIn instead of hiring me, the man with the deepest voice in the world? Yes. Yes, it does. Get started today and see why LinkedIn is the place to be to be. We'll even give you a $100 credit on your next campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
What is The Briefing Room? It's a behind-the-scenes look at how the criminal justice system works and the lives of the people within that system.
If you love true crime, well, these are the real people who do the job every day of making sure justice is served.
Hi, I'm Detective Dave.
I'm Detective Dan. Together, we have decades of experience in local law enforcement, a profession that we think is often misunderstood.
So we're going to explore how to do it right, and we won't shy away from when it's done wrong. These are stories you'll hear nowhere else. Unique, frank, and unvarnished.
From the team that brought you Small Town Dicks, this is The Briefing Room. Episode 1 drops on August 30th.
We'll meet you in the briefing room.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.
And welcome back to Scarred for Life, the podcast where we open up old wounds by looking back at the films that scared us as kids. I'm Terry.
And I'm Mary Beth.
In each episode, our special guest brings with them a movie that traumatized them as a child.
This week, our guest is writer and director Jennifer Reeder. She's the filmmaker behind films such as Knives and Skin and Signature Move. She also directed the wraparound segment Holy Hell in VHS 94, which is currently streaming on Shudder. Welcome to the show!
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for joining us. I'm really excited to dig into your career because both of us loved Knives and Skin, and I was really surprised at VHS 94, if I'm going to be honest. I really enjoyed that.
Oh, thanks. I wasn't sure you could go either way. I feel like VHS 94, if I've learned anything, it's like, well, all the VHS franchise is really polarizing. I feel like even the people who hate it love to hate it. So you could have been like, I hated it and I loved hating it, you know? I mean, the wraparound is anyone, consumers and makers will tell you that the wraparound is sort of like the notoriously the hardest thing to do in any anthology, if anthologies have a wraparound. But I guess that in VHS 94, the wraparound in particular has been extremely polarizing. And this was maybe, this is no exception. Although I have to say that, and maybe we can get into this later, but ultimately what ended up on kind of the final screen is a little bit different than what I had anticipated. I sort of maybe made something originally kind of too kind of drifty and ambitious for the VHS franchise. I think they like things to kind of move, and it's like more gore, more bludgeoning, just get to that. And I mean, you've seen Knives and Skin. I sort of like to be like, let's contextualize this. Let's sort of like unpack female empowerment in this moment,
Yes.
But I'm still really happy that the whole film is doing so well. And there's not just one, but two female writer and directors involved in this one.
Yes. Oh my God, finally. Oops, who said that?
I'll be honest. I honestly, of the middle sections, I loved the Ratma. I loved her segment so much.
Is incredible.
Yeah, Chloe's is great. And I don't know if you're keeping up on Instagram, but she's been posting the most excellent fan art. People
oh my God.
drawing pictures and making little sculptures of Ratma. It's so cool.
That's incredible. But let's go back to the beginning before we talk about your incredible career. How did you get into horror?
Well, I think from the very beginning, or the moment that I picked up a video camera, I did a project when I was in grad school that was a kind of live action comic book about the adventures of a girl superhero named White Trash Girl, and which you can see on my Vimeo page for free. And it wasn't so much horror, but definitely genre. White Trash Girl's weapon is her body. She has an erupting body. So from the very beginning of my life as a filmmaker, although at that time I was shooting on video, but that's being picky about it. I was interested in, a kind of body horror, a way that, the fantastical possibilities of the whole of the sort of genre sphere helped me, talk about social issues, especially those related to gender and empowerment and to also kind of like pick the scab off of whatever subject I kind of wanted to talk about and kind of let it bleed or ooze or whatever. I mean, White Trash Girls is it's really abject and gross, and I really meant it to be that way. And I think that then, even though maybe, the films that I made became, varying levels of maybe, grossness or oozing, but, like horror or like, even making something that was like adjacent to horror or thriller, or at least kind of leaning into the darker aspects of humanity and the human existence have always been a part of my films. And for so many of them, lately in the past 10 or 12 years, even longer than that, maybe there have been, bleeding bodies or dead bodies, dead girls in particular, which I just think has always been such a problem, in so much of like film and television. And instead of ignoring it, I just wanted to embrace it and try to present this problematic thing, but do it in a way that felt like it was also critiquing it and thinking about it, and both in cinema and in real life, and as both a person and a filmmaker. So, and I think that, again, as a consumer of films, and especially, kind of horror and thriller and the psychological and the surreal, I just feel like as a visual filmmaker, the sort of horror, in particular, allows me to really lean into the fantastical, and kind of lean into the surreal. I love, I pointed out earlier before we started to my Maya Deren doll, who's the kind of queen of surreal, or sort of like the, my godmother on some level. Of course, I never knew her, but, she was deeply influential to me as or her films were deeply influential to me as a young filmmaker. The way that she uses herself and the surreal and a kind of, a dark parallel world. So I like being able to lean into the surreal and the fantastical, and I think that horror is a really great way to do that. And I like to continue to think about bodies and female bodies and erupting bodies. And, that's hard to do in a family drama or a romantic comedy. I mean, Signature Move, which you brought up, was like a special project, because when Fawzia Mirza, who was the co-writer and the producer and the star of that film, approached me to do it, I was like, does anybody die? She said no. I was like, does anybody, is anybody bleeding at any point? No, not that we see on film, not that we see on the screen, I was like, does anybody sing? Are there, I just kept kind of going through, the things that I like to do. And she kept saying, no, no, no. She said, but it is this like really special Chicago-based story about, women of color falling in love. And I was like, okay, I love that. And I will try it out. I mean, it's on the one hand, it feels like a very different film than what I normally am, but it was like, it's still like a cousin to what I normally do, and I was still able to kind of like lean into with these beautiful Mexican and Pakistani cultures, visually, and write something that was delightful and that people really liked laughing at and not from dark humor, but then I made that film and then I happily pivoted back into my dark world.
Yeah. Okay. So one of the things, and this is kind of getting a little bit ahead of my conversation, but one of the things that stood out to me is you were talking about, in particular, the way that like films and television handles the dead female body. And what kind of struck me about Knives and Skin, and I rewatched it this weekend because it's been I think 2 years since I saw it, was the fact that the dead girl in that is actively trying to not be seen. Like she's rolling away from the camera and her body vanishes. And so there's that magical aspect of it, but it kind of just is like poking in my mind now as you were talking about that. Yeah.
And with Carol and Harper in that, in that film, I knew that she, I knew that I wanted her to be to kind of be a dead body pretty quickly towards the beginning of the film. And for that not to be a mystery, and for us as the audience to be able to take her in as a character, actually an active character. Yeah. But I didn't want to define her as like, she's not quite a ghost. She's not quite a zombie. She has agency. I mean, not in the way of like Swiss Army Man or something. I mean, she's not or like Weekend at Bernie's, you know what I mean? Right. She's not a parrot. She's not a joke, but she has agency. And I think that right, she's sort of disappearing from the camera. But when I was writing it, I actually imagined that her movement was also moving actually closer to the characters so that she could be found by them, and that's, I mean, I'm a little bit of a, well, let's actually tell it like it is. I'm a big kind of true crime, fan, both in terms of TV and, podcasts and, books and articles and whatnot. And, it's always so sad when there's a person that, goes missing and their bodies are either never found or their bodies are found so much longer after they have died. The sort of loneliness and the idea of someone sort of a body, a dead body being kind of out in the wilderness hidden and having no agency to say, here I am, I'm over here, So I wanted to give her this kind of impossible task of being a dead body who knows that she is dead, but is also kind of willing herself to be found. And in her kind of reanimation is what also is sending out these, I don't know if it's like signals to the other characters or it's, the other people in that town are worried about her missing. And obviously that kind of worry sends all of this, emotional anxiety through the town, and people break up and people get together and, other secrets are revealed, et cetera, which I think is not that uncommon when with a shared kind of tragedy, like this. But I wanted to reanimate her, and to the level of that scene in somewhere in the middle where she kind of leads off a whole bunch of the characters singing, a kind of a lullaby version of Promises, Promises, which is a scene that I think is also, speaking of polarizing, which with some people are like, WTF, yes, or like WTF, like no. And that's actually a moment that was a kind of not an ode to, but I bit directly from Magnolia, There's a scene in Magnolia where all those characters are singing together. And not that I'm really not a big P.T. Anderson fan by any means, but I really love Magnolia.
Me too. It's the one movie of his that I like unabashedly love. I've talked about on the podcast multiple times.
It's so smart. It's so complicated. He was so young when he made it. It's just like unbelievable how complicated that film is and how funny and heartbreaking. But I remember the first time and weird. Oh my gosh, so weird. And the first time that I saw it in that scene where they're all singing, I just was like, hold on, what's going on here? You know, I felt like, you know, and I know that, I mean, there was the awkwardness of it, the weirdness, the breaking of the wall, etc. And I just loved that scene so much. And I remember as, you know, a young filmmaker watching that and being like, I'm going to use that. I'm going to bite that someday. And it didn't become clear when I needed to do that until Knives and Skin. And it didn't even become clear till like further on in the writing of that script phase that I wanted them all to sing. I wanted Carolyn's voice to kind of anchor them all, that she starts the song and they all sing to her. Anyway, yeah, but it's I would say one more thing about that, you know, I had been asked when Knives and Skin first came out about how I could consider myself, you know, a feminist filmmaker and make a film like that sort of uses so much this image of the dead girl. And from my perspective, it's like, I don't know. I mean, I'm allowed to also be a filmmaker who's working out my own relationship to problematic images. And I'm allowed to be a filmmaker who also happens to be a parent, who is working out, you know, my own relationship to like the greatest fears of my life, you know? And you know, and I also think that I'm a woman who, you know, I'm a human woman in the world, who is also trying to, you know, I mean, literally on a daily basis still, which is so sad, working out, you know, how I contribute to to abolishing, you know, violence against women or violence against people in general, you know?
Yeah.
And I don't want to make triggering images. You know, I think that there's a lot of films, where the film was about something, but they, you know, the images in the film are actually kind of like re-traumatizing or re-triggering, you know?
Right.
And, so I didn't want to do that. And I don't, you know, I can't say, for me, I succeeded. I mean, we actually, when we were, preparing the kind of hair and makeup for the actor who played Carolyn Harper, we actually looked at a bunch of these really extraordinary figure paintings by a painter named Jenny Saville, who, you know, her paintings are so gorgeous and they're just, you know, they really are about bodies and kind of goopy, smudgy bodies, you know, but we weren't looking at actual corpses. You know, we were looking at paintings and actually trying to make something that didn't look like a real dead body, you know, but that looked like a representation of one. So I don't know. I was careful to do that. And I stand by Carolyn Harper.
I think you should.
I think you should.
It surprised me that people are saying that maybe it wasn't a feminist film, because I found it incredibly, especially on this rewatch, just incredibly impactful from a feminist lens.
There seems to be a hard time. I think sometimes people have a hard time with women trying to reclaim their violence that's enacted against their bodies. I found that as a person who writes about like rape revenge films and finds those kinds of movies very fascinating and empowering, people, like, I did my graduate thesis on rape revenge films, and people were like, how can you do this as a woman? And I was like, I don't know. Like, I don't know what to tell you. It's always just very awkward that people seem to have that perspective, that in my experience, at least, that like somehow we as women aren't allowed to try to like process our experiences through embracing those representations. It's just it's weird.
No, I agree. And I think there, you know, in Knives and Skin and in a lot of the other films that I made leading up to Knives and Skin, I mean, I got criticism for the Carolyn Harper's mother's character who seduces this young man, but kind of as an extension of her, as an extension of her grief, you know, which I think grief is extraordinary and particular and personal, and grieving people do all sorts of weird things and make all sorts of mistakes, because presumably you are dealing with the most horrible thing you've ever dealt with. You've never dealt with it before. You have no, no one's telling you how to deal with it. And I love writing complicated and difficult women. And I like writing even women who are on the verge of being unlikable. I mean, kind of that's why I like Carrie, I mean, I think that the idea that a woman writing scripts and directing films has to only portray other women in a certain way, is ridiculous. And to be criticized for writing, women who make mistakes and are mean, that doesn't allow then for, that's just, then you're simply reinstating, certain ideas about who women are. And I think that there are, my claim is that there are still so many, statistically, films with female leads do better at the box office and in terms of kind of ratings, according to the Gina Davis Institute and other stat collecting organizations. And yet so many of those films are written and directed by men. Yeah. I just think that, and they portray women in a certain way. And even the ones, I remember being on an airplane and I watched back to back Silver Linings Playbook, Black Swan, and Blue Jasmine. I mean, there had to have been not that much more to watch, but I feel like those are three films, both, all three directed by men, all three of them that are about unraveling women. And all three of them were sort of like profoundly disappointing to me. And I remember just like, and it was like a transatlantic flight going the other way over the ocean. So everybody else was either asleep or, and I was like, did you guys watch Black Swan? You didn't watch it? You watched Blue Jasmine? Anybody watching Blue? No? Okay. Never mind. I was so like, wanted to unpack it, wanted to sort of like unpack that experience, but everybody else, opted for different films or was like, sleeping their way over the Atlantic Ocean.
One of the things that I think we're seeing recently is, now that there are more queer people writing queer roles, that we're seeing queer characters that aren't necessarily likable sometimes. And a lot of the feedback, particularly, unfortunately, from gay people or queer people is that, you're not presenting us in a good light. And I'm like, we can't have queer filmmaking is such a niche thing still that we can't have just like one monolith, because all that's going to do is show one side of the queer experience to people. And there are complete assholes who happen to be queer. It's just, you can't. And so I was thinking about that as you were talking about, women directors making problematic characters or making female characters that are unlikable. It's part of the experience. You're going to run into that.
Right. And I actually think that some of the best kind of like, film protagonists of all races and genders and, sexual orientations, et cetera, abilities, et cetera, are, they're complicated and we love them because they are maybe at the end of the day kind of unknowable, and unpredictable and maybe they don't always make the most ethical decisions, and their motivations are murky, I think that it just goes back to the sense of, that makes a complicated human. I actually feel like that's what we all are as complicated humans. We get to make mistakes and we get to kind of lean into instincts, which maybe, can disrupt our ability to sort of like have the best kind of ethical judgment from time to time. But I think that, it shouldn't be the case that only certain people are allowed to have those complications and that everybody else has to have a kind of polished old school fairy tale kind of like fairy godmother, fairy godfather, fairy genderqueer, however you want to describe it. It's just like, it's not fair. I remember again on playing watching Karyn Kusama's Destroyer. The hair and makeup in that one is a little off, I think. But, God, you know, Nicole Kidman as that main character, you know, or that main character is just awesome. You know, I mean, from my perspective, I was like, God, I hate her. I love her. I love to hate her. I hate loving her, you know, or whatever. I just think that's a really brilliant, a really, really brilliant film. I mean, that was somebody who I was like, in real life, I would want to be friends with that woman, even though I would be 100% terrified of that woman, you know? And I don't know. I just thought that she was a really, really complicated, person, colleague, mother. And I think that's the other thing too, like making another layer is like making difficult mothers, you know, because again, there's this sense that sort of like, and this happens in real life, like the idea that once you become a mother, that then there's that somehow that makes, like biologically, that makes you unable to like make, you know, bad decisions or make unethical decisions. And, you know, that's real unfair too. You know, that sort of eliminates your ability to actually be, you know, human after you become a mother. And I'm certainly not talking about, you know, any parent who is, you know, mean to their child, you know, I mean, those are not the characters that I write by any means. But yeah, you know, Carolyn Harper's mother is someone who was, you know, grieving to the point of wanting to get as close as she could to the last person who saw her child alive. I mean, that for me feels peculiar and particular, but authentic, potentially very authentic and really believable. Because I think that we all have seen cases where if the grieving parent, especially the grieving mother, doesn't grieve in a way that the rest of society thinks is appropriate, then maybe she killed her kid.
Yep.
You know, which is like, that's a big leap.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Okay. So VHS, you mentioned earlier, and I'm glad you brought that up because I wanted to ask you, because it seems from an outside perspective that writing and directing a wraparound segment, particularly when it's like interjected throughout the story as well, is a lot more difficult than telling a story that is beginning, middle, end. Here's your 20 minutes. So I was kind of curious what your experience was doing that.
So I came in kind of late in the process. I was contacted by two of the producers in, it might have been March of 2021, this past March.
Wow.
Because David Bruckner, who's been involved in the VHS franchise for a while, had just gotten called off to do Hellraiser, and which he's doing right now with a female Pinhead, which is going to be awesome.
I'm so excited.
So they needed a new director to do the wraparound, and pretty quickly, because all things were time sensitive. Chloe had already shot Ratma. Ryan and Simon were going into production within a couple of weeks of them talking to me. So the train, so to say, had like left the station.
Right.
At that point, part of Ryan's section involved like an actor from what the sort of idea that I had inherited, and Timo's section changed very, very much so, you know, he hadn't shot his section. He actually shot his section after mine, but there was a little bit of an idea of the other shorts, parts of the other shorts already had incorporated the general idea of a SWAT team who raids what they think is a super drug lab, and then it turns into something else. I mean, that kind of was the most bare bones. I inherited a script from David Bruckner and Simon Barrett. Neither script, and they'll say this to you also, was like fully fleshed out. It kind of wanted to be its own kind of short, but I think at the same time they were just like, oh, I don't know, nobody pays that much attention to the wraparound. They just want to get back to the shorts. And, you know, I just thought that, and there was already a cast attached. So everybody who's in the wraparound of VHS 94 was already attached. The producers, you know, gave me the option of recasting it. But, you know, I just thought, gosh, you know, I've been waiting to make a film for all of 2020, and I'm sure these actors have been waiting to make a film again, so I'm not going to just recast it. I'm not the filmmaker I think I am if I can't, kind of inherit a cast, inherit a like one little half of a sentence of a log line and make something of it. So I did do something that again was like maybe too ambitious for maybe any anthology, which is I wrote the wraparound as its own short. Mm. There was an ending that got kind of cut. There was a beginning and an ending that both got cut, and other bits of storyline in the middle that also got cut, mostly in service to kind of getting back to the shorts, Mm-hmm. On the one hand, I would say like, okay, I get that. On the other hand, I would say, okay, audiences are smart. And if you do the wraparound the right way, an audience, there's all sorts of films that are told entirely out of order. Yep. And an audience isn't, God, I just hate that I'm going to bring up Quentin Tarantino, but let's just talk about Pulp Fiction just for a second. Not just as a structure, fuck Quentin Tarantino. Let me just say that out loud. But also, if we think about, if I look at Pulp Fiction just structurally, it's not like an audience comes back to a moment that happened before the other moment and is like, oh my God, did the movie start over? Like, I don't understand what just happened.
Right.
Film audiences are actually, I think, a lot smarter than some film producers think that they are, and I've found that horror fans are the biggest cinephiles, mm-hmm. have watched everything, can talk about everything, understand film theory without ever having taken film theory, understand, film history without ever taking film history. Anyway, so, I tried to do something that was a short film. And I think that, at the end of the day, I sort of had to acquiesce and say like, okay, I get it. The wraparound is, there has to be, sort of like in service to the shorts. But what I did was take on a kind of feminist, Videodrome. I'm a big, Cronenberg fan, and I wanted to, I wanted the wraparound to feel kind of in that like ode to Videodrome, but, long live the new female flesh.
Hell yeah.
Kind of mentality.
I love that.
Speaking of all hail the new female flesh, I think that's a good transition to Carrie, maybe? Yeah. But mm-hmm. Jennifer, what film are we talking about today?
We are talking about Brian De Palma's Carrie, based on a novel by the first novel from Stephen King. The film was made in 1976, starring Sissy Spacek and Piper Laurie.
Oh, Piper Laurie.
Amy Irving, and a supporting part by John Travolta.
Yes, wow. I forgot John Travolta was in this movie. But really quick, I'll read a synopsis for everyone who needs to get caught up. Carrie White, a shy, friendless teenage girl who is sheltered by her domineering religious mother, unleashes her telekinetic powers after being humiliated by her classmates at her senior prom.
So let's take it back to the beginning. I have to know, how did you see this movie? When did you see it? Give us your horror story. I want to know everything about your first time watching this movie.
Well, I was trying to think about the first time I saw it, and it certainly wasn't when it first came out, because I was much too young when it first came out. And I grew up in a household with a small group of older brothers who, when my parents would leave, would, kind of troll around the cable channels, watch things that, were certainly inappropriate for me, but that was not something that they were thinking about. They wanted to watch what they wanted to watch. I'm certain that I saw it when I was probably 12 or 13. And prior to starting my own first menstrual cycle, and not in high school, I remember, not unlike Carrie, the thing is, I remember watching that opening scene and being just as confused about what was happening to her. And my mom, who's 90, is still alive, and I love her dearly, but she was not at all like, Mrs. White, but she was this kind of staunch Irish Catholic mother who did not talk to me about menstruation. She didn't. When I asked her, I remember I saw that she had like a box of napkins in her closet on the and I was like, Mom, why do you have napkins? Like, I was thinking like, dinner napkins or whatever. Mm-hmm. Why do you have napkins in your closet? And she just was just like, we're not going to talk about that right now or whatever. I'm paraphrasing, but I just grew up with a mother who really did not want to talk to me about what would happen to my body. And I don't know if she just assumed that I would learn that in school or that I would learn it on my own or that somehow I would have an instinct towards it. I'm not sure. So, but all I'm saying is like when I watched Carrie for the first time and she's bleeding in the shower and does not understand what's happening to her, I remember watching it for the first time and I also didn't know what was happening to her. So I didn't understand why they were laughing at her and then why her mom was so mad. I mean, I think that it was as like a young girl watching it, I just also was in the dark about what was happening to her. And then, of course, it just gets like so social cliquey, and it goes into this other place, this other dark place where probably as, I don't know what grade I was in, maybe 6th or 7th, where I was just like, gosh, the mean girls really will get even meaner. I mean, there was something that was like socially the idea that like, that there's horror. The horror is every day. You are going to be haunted by, it's not the ghosts in the backyard or the monsters under the bed. It's like that, bitchy head cheerleader that's going to, really be your demise. And maybe also an overprotective mom, I mean, like I said, I love my mother so dearly and she and I have a very, very close relationship, but she was definitely, had her sort of controlling moments when I was, much younger. And so there was also something that felt really scary about that mother-daughter relationship. My mother, for the record, never, ever locked me in a closet. I did not have to read Bible verses or anything like that,
There's no scary cat-eyed Jesus.
Nope. Thankfully, nope. And then I remember, God, it's like that end. I remember actually feeling really, empowered even as a young person at the end where, at the prom where she's that image of her covered in blood in her beautiful little dress, and her tiara just covered in blood, just shutting the whole prom down, shutting the whole town down, also felt, that sort of revenge, vengeance, moment was great. And then of course there's like that incredible jump scare at the end.
The stinger.
When Sue's having her nightmare, and Carrie's arm comes up through the, through the ground is great. Cause it's not a film that's scary because of jump scares. And it's not to say that there weren't other films that I saw as a kid. I mean, I was also thinking even just today talking to you guys, there was a film that I saw around that same time, The Legend of Boggy Creek, which is a kind of found footage, about a Bigfoot. And that has a lot of jump scares and is in that kind of found footage style. And I remember being really scared, really, really like that kind of jump scare. Carrie is not about the jump scares. Carrie's like about it's about like the deepness, the deep psychology around family and religion and girlhood and vengeance. And I don't know. It's so powerful. It's astonishing. It's astonishing that film was both written by a man and directed by a man. Cause I think both the novel and the film are honestly masterful. I mean, I actually am a Stephen King. I love reading Stephen King, literature. I mean, it's like a kind of a beach read and a plane read, and I just think it's actually really smart and funny, so much of his horror is funny and clever. And I love that oftentimes like one story refers to another story, and you realize we're all part of that, we're all part of that universe. And I am a Brian De Palma super fan, I mean, Body Double, Dress to Kill, Blowout. I mean, that kind of era of that. I mean, he went on to do other things, sort of like more recently, but that whole kind of 70s to the 80s Brian De Palma is just irresistible. It's like
Phantom of the Paradise.
God,
that's right.
It's like
Phantom of the Paradise. Yes.
It's like there's some erotic moments, you know,
yeah.
and the kind of this sort of like drifty like this camera and the exactly the sort of like split diopter stuff. It's, you know, it's so distinctive. He was such a singular director on some level. Yeah, I find the whole De Palma catalog pretty irresistible. But yeah, that was the origins of Carrie. And I think that it's a film that I wanted to talk about because I actually think that it's still so fresh. I've not watched any of the new iterations of Carrie. I just can't.
I was going to ask. I was curious about that.
No, I won't. I can't. You know, because it just feels like. Also, I'm a big Sissy Spacek fan. I had to relook just today at when she did Badlands, which I'm a big fan of Terrence Malick's Badlands, which she did when she like just 3 years prior. She made it's like 1973 that she made Badlands, which is also another great kind of subtle serial killer movie, you know, with her and Martin Sheen, a very young Martin Sheen. But I'm a fan of hers, and so I feel, you know, I feel beholden to the De Palma Spacek Carrie.
Mary Beth, when did you see this movie?
I don't remember when, but I do remember I was young because I knew what periods were. I do know that, but my mom was the opposite of your mom, Jennifer, and my mom was very excited to teach me all about the wonderful world of being a woman. We were very open about it in my household, and it scared the shit out of me. I do remember watching it. I always remember, like, I was sitting in my dad's apartment where he was living with his second wife, and we were watching it, and my dad sucks. I don't speak to him. He was giggling at the beginning because he's a child. And this is like why I remember it. It's terrible. My memory of Carrie was like my dad laughing at all the boobs with his preteen daughter and laughing at Plug It Up and Dirty Pillows. So obviously, great. I also remember being very freaked out by how she got her period, like how it just started like, it's kind of an aggressive period. Like it's like not terrible. It's not like squirting, but it is very much like jarring to see her period start like that. And then I remember the end. I don't remember much else other than my dad being immature, and then also like obviously the ending where she like blows everything up. And I hadn't seen it until recently. I wrote about Carrie, and I rewatched it before this a couple of weeks ago. Actually, I forgot how I don't remember any of like the stuff in between. Like the beginning and the end. And I just forgot how deeply sad this movie makes me and how like just it hurts my heart a lot, like especially watching Carrie get bullied, because that I think I had a memory when I was watching it that like this movie made me terrified of going to high school because I was like ready to get bullied in the locker room. Like I was not like a Carrie level, but like I was a nerd and I was a little bit weird, and I was just like I just knew I was gonna get my ass kicked in the locker room. I didn't. No one did, but like I was just terrified, and like this watching it as an adult kind of brought back that fear this movie kind of instilled in my heart of high school girls, because this movie, like the women and the girls in this movie are like next level cruel to Carrie. Like it is. The beginning, it's like eat shit, and like they're hitting her because she misses one volleyball, like one thing at the volleyball court. I don't know sports, and from then on, it's just like Plug It Up and just abuse after abuse. This poor girl, and no one's really doing anything about it. Really, like the teacher kind of steps. I don't know. This whole thing just made me very terrified of high school. The idea of getting to the prom.
Yes, no doubt. And I think that it's not just, you know, I mean, I watched it again. I've watched it a ton of times, but I was like, I watched it again yesterday just to sort of like get all fresh. And God, I mean, I was thinking like, God, if there was a follow-up that was like a kind of a fan fiction follow-up, it would be called like Eve Was Weak, you know, because there was like that really, you know, she goes from having this, and well, Carrie is so kind of self-aware, you know, she comes home and her mom has gotten a phone call from school and that said like she started her period, and her mother, you know, thinks it's this sinful thing, and Carrie understands like, you should have told me, you know, I think this is normal, you should have told me. And her mother's just like she can't she's getting bullied at school. She's getting bullied at home. But we also get to experience her as someone who she's not stupid. She has a self-awareness. There's some like kind of tender moments with, her and Amy Irving's, boyfriend Tommy, who asks her to the prom, which is like, kind of a setup, but also just kind of an acceptance thing, which of course kind of goes all wrong. We understand. And you get to see these other moments of like those supporting kind of crazy bitchy girls and see what their home life is like, or see how they, Nancy Allen, who I so love all of her moments in other Brian De Palma films. And there's a scene in the car with her and John Travolta where she's kind of like, she kisses him and then she moves away and he can't understand. Like, there's just like this understanding that, that even the teen girls who seem to be the ringleaders of this bullying are not, no one's actually talked to them about being kind of self-aware of their sexuality.
Right.
But that's why it's just like so incredibly smart that somehow, and I could see another read of this film going in down a very kind of, this is a very, anti-feminist anthem or very anti, female empowerment, but and that's not all that I'm interested in, but I just think that it's complex, the women in this film are complicated from Carrie to like Sue's mother. Sue is Amy Irving's character. Sue's mother, who, Carrie's mom goes to kind of sell her Bibles or whatever.
Yes.
And she's like drinking in the afternoon, watching a soap opera or something. I mean, it's subtle, but like, oh, that's something, And then, the Carrie's mother, Piper Laurie herself, who eventually confesses that, Carrie's father, like she was basically, had like so much lust for this man who had whiskey on his breath. I mean, it's like really the layers have layers have layers. And yeah, the Betty Buckley character, Eight is Enough, the mom from Eight is Enough, or maybe stepmom, was she a stepmom from Eight is Enough? Who, tries to help, but is also is not, her intentions are also maybe kind of unclear. Yeah. And then the end just turns into that great, what you needed from that moment, which is just like pure rageaholic, pure teenage girl, rageaholic, who still may or may not be menstruating. The time frame of this film, it could be a week, it could be 2 weeks. It's really unclear. She might be right at the tail end of that first period.
Well, and to use something about Carrie's self-awareness and all the other girls, like the moment I also think of is when she gets asked to the prom and she's sitting kind of like on that bench away from everybody, and the teacher comes to talk to her and she's like, they're fucking with me. Like, I know why he asked me to prom. And she got that self-awareness, but then the teacher is like, oh, but you're so pretty. You could put on mascara and you could put on lipstick and blush and do your hair. And there's just like this emphasis on aesthetic sexuality, if that makes sense, like looking sexual, but not actually going into like the nitty gritty of what it means to be a sexual being, which I really picked up like thinking about this time. It's like there's this emphasis on women being pretty, looking a certain way and what that means. But when it comes to like what it means to actually have a vagina and like function as a like that kind of stuff,
right?
It's just like, it's terrifying to everybody to even think about. So it's, and because it's like, you get your period, everyone gets your period, but the periods are terrifying still, and to this day periods terrify people. And it's just fascinating that it's like these young women who get their period also see it as disgusting. Like we are
well, and it's really true. And I wonder, I don't know how many, we definitely do not see women menstruating on commercials, right? The liquid is blue, which anyone still wondering who's not seen menstrual blood, it's not pale blue.
Pale blue, guys. Sorry.
I just wanted to tell you that. And I think that we still...
What lies are television telling me?
there still is so... Okay, there's also like a first period scene in Blue Lagoon, this film with Brooke Shields. They're lost on an island and she has her period for the first time. And I would love to know... There can't be 100 films. There has to be less than 100 films. There has to, maybe, I don't know. Maybe I'll go down a rabbit hole this week and figure out how many films you've actually seen, what we could think of as, as menstrual blood, actual menstrual blood in a film, because people are very, very bloody in lots and lots and lots of films. But, I wonder how often it's menstrual blood. I mean, I was just thinking, like, for a film that was made in 1976, that starts off with a scene of, a naked girl who's bleeding, but, from a natural way. I don't know. Like, it just was, it's curious to me, and I've definitely, I mean, there's a menstrual scene in Knives and Skin where you think a woman is having a miscarriage, and then you realize that she's actually, just having her period and faking her pregnancy. That's a spoiler alert for anyone who's not seen Knives and Skin, but I made it, so I can spoil it if I need to, But yeah, it's a real curiosity to me. And I think that it actually is related to why I like making the films that I make, and why in even the past 5 years or something, people have asked me a lot, like, well, why do you think there's this, why do you think there's so many women who are, writing about horror as, like, writers and critics and theoreticians, et cetera, historians, or why are there so many more women, writing horror as script writers or making horror as directors? And, first, I say, well, a teenage girl invented the most famous monster. I mean, Mary Shelley was a teenager when Frankenstein was published. But, it also, for me, it's about our relationship to our bodies and menstruation. I mean, it's like from a very young age, you have a very consistent, pretty robust relationship with blood. It's all very different. I mean, I know, Mary Beth, you were saying that Carrie's first menstrual cycle was more gushy than you've experienced, but I've definitely had sort of like gushy moments where I was like, I'm a crime scene. I'm instantly a crime scene.
Gushy for first period. I have experienced my fair share of crime.
Or were you
crimes? You're like, this is bad.
Or you wake up in the morning, and I actually saw there's a short film also that's also on my Vimeo called All Small Bodies, where there's a scene where a girl starts her period for the first time, but she's like, in bed with another girl, not in a sexual way, but they're just like they're in bed together, and she looks at the other girl, and the other girl has like blood all over her mouth, but because the girl who started her period and she's kind of moved around the bed, and then she's kind of, her hands have landed on the other girl's face, like as things do when one is sleeping in a sound way, and moves around. I think that our relationship to blood, from a very young age makes us, qualified to make films about blood. And I think that we, Carrie is a different kind of predator and prey movie, but I think that we also learn from an early age who are the predator and who are prey, which is also very unfair to men. I just think, and I'm being very binary right now, but I think that, that sort of like any man who has been walking down the street and sees a girl walk across the street and walk away or something like that, or clutch her purse when he gets closer or something like that, has experienced another kind of, kind of prejudgment. But I think that we know blood, we learn fear, we learn how to be afraid. We learn that fear is a part of, our lives. I mean, we are taught how to not, get attacked or get raped, as opposed to men not being told like, hey, here's something, a wild idea. Don't fucking rape anybody. You know what I mean? And of course, women can, be sexual, assaulters and violators as well. Of course, I just want to clarify my binariness right now. But yeah, and I think there's been a lot of, Hitchcock's Rebecca is also a favorite, film of mine that was based on a book that was written by a woman, Patricia Highsmith and, Shirley Jackson. Octavia Butler. There's been so many, women who have dealt with, horror in terms of literature, and really goopy, gory stuff.
Yeah. One of the things that kind of popped out to me in this conversation we had is the first time I had a realization when I was watching it this time that the first time I started to watch this movie, I was watching it with my parents, and I was probably 9 or 10, and we didn't get very far because as I've talked about on the podcast, my parents were very much if there's nudity in it, you're not going to watch it. So this opens up. And so I remember being absolutely horrified that this woman is running towards the camera with blood on her hands. No idea what was happening. And I'm like, what is this? And then my parents like, nope, we're done, and turned it off. And so that was my first experience with Carrie. Then I've also mentioned on the podcast before where my parents became a little bit more conservative in terms of the content I was consuming on television. So I started reading, and that's how I discovered Stephen King. And I remember reading the book and still reading the book being confused. Like, I don't understand what a period is. I don't understand what is happening to this woman. I don't understand any of this. But then convincing my parents a couple years later that, like, I've read the book so I can see this movie. And so they had let me watch the movie by myself. And so I watched the movie, and I was still utterly confused and horrified about what was happening. I must have been like 11 or 12 at the time. And I remember as a kid not liking the movie because the book is a lot more, I would say, epic towards the end, where she's walking through the town, she's blowing up gas stations, power lines are falling. Like the path of destruction she leaves in her wake to her mom's house is quite epic. Of course, none of that is in here. She leaves. There's a lot of destruction at the prom. She kills Chris and Billy, and then she's at the house. So, like, I remember being disappointed as a kid. And that was my takeaway from it, being so confused as to what was happening, and to being disappointed at the lack of destruction in the movie. But I started thinking, rewatching this now, about how terrible public school sex education is.
You fucking think?
Because, like, because I remember in 5th grade, and I know it was 5th grade because I remember my teacher, and I was still in Alaska. So, Mrs. Michael Sheck, if you were out there, I remember you. There's one day where, like, she was, like, doing anatomy. It was very basic anatomy, but it was reproductive anatomy. And she had put a box in the room, and she's like, if you have any embarrassing questions that you want to ask, you can put it in there. And me not knowing anything at all about human anatomy.
Like, I have a box if you want to put something in it.
I didn't even get that. Yes.
Thank you for that one. Anyway, Terry, continue.
But I remember sliding my piece of paper in there,
into her box,
which said, "What do men's balls have?" Because I didn't know what they were called. I didn't know any of that. And so that is literally what I put in the box. And I remember to this day, that is exactly how it was written. What do men's balls have?
What was her answer?
So Mrs. Michael Sheck was this very prim, she was from Britain. So she still had an accent, and she's in class, and she is going through it. She has glasses.
She had an accent?
Yes. And she sits there and she pulls out this note, and she looks at it. She looks at the class, and she goes, "What do men's balls have?" And there was like this pause, and the class started giggling, and then she's like, "Well, I think you're talking about testes." And then she laid into like the discussion of it. But that was my first, like, and the whole class laughed at my question, not knowing that I was the one that wrote it, and no one knew that it was me, but still people are laughing about it. And so I remember thinking back to, when I saw this movie, thinking back about how people are laughing at her for her, like, body and her sexuality, and remember thinking about that when I was watching that movie. And then the last time we had sex education was in 8th grade, and it was a whole week long, and it was in science class, and they separated the men and the women. And we went into our own little things, and the boys learned about men's reproductive system. The women learned about female reproductive system, but no one knew about anything else. And so there was still this mystery and this magicalness and this confusingness about women's bodies that was not even answered. And that was like the only time we ever had sex education. My parents never talked about it. I didn't know anything at all about any of the things my body was going to go through, just like through knowing friends or, going through it myself. And it's a scary time, and nothing to the extent of what's happening with Carrie ever happened, but it was still a frightening time because no one would talk about it. And when people did talk about it, it was all about laughs.
Yeah. No, it's really true. And I think that even, we are a culture obsessed with women's bodies and still actually don't really know what's going on down there, And, I have 3 sons, and I did, I talked to them as much as I could about their own bodies, but I remember trapping, at that point, like my 11-year-old in the car because he had gotten a gift certificate to Target or something. And I was like, okay, let's you and I go to Target and pick something out. And so I trapped him. It was like a 15-minute drive. And I actually spoke to him only about, female bodies, because I was like, I just want you to know, like, what happens. And, this poor dear, he got into Target and like, picked out with his gift card, like a Star Wars minifigure. I mean, he was just like, he wasn't like, well, I'm going to go buy a box of condoms, I mean, he was still like, still 11. Maybe he was a little bit older, but I mean, it still felt very important that he knew. And because I just thought like, and I remember like bracketing it, like if someone is making fun of a girl in your class, or talking about periods, like I want you to know what it is and I want you to just stop that conversation. I want you to be the person who stops that conversation. And who knows if that's ever happened, but it felt really important to talk to him about that. And there's also, there's a whole sequence in Knives and Skin where these two girls who are falling in love with each other, you see that they've been exchanging little gifts to each other that presumably, or how I wrote it, they've been like hiding little trinkets in their vaginas to give to each other. And, which I just wanted to write as a most eccentric kind of way to pass a note to your secret crush or whatever. And when the film premiered at the Berlin Film Festival, and even subsequent times that I screened it, but I remember at Berlin, a sort of a very kind of German guy, stood up and was like, was ist das? What was the scene with these girls and this passing of the, and I was like, okay, well, let's just break it down. We have holes. We have holes and they fit things. And, I mean, I don't know. And of course, like, some of the, and I didn't mean to like, I wasn't trying to kind of like, I didn't want to like call this guy out and make fun of him. Right. But at the same time, I was kind of just like, are you serious? Come on. You know what I mean? Like, please, either if it's confusing to you, Google it, or if you just want to try to, I don't think that he was trying to embarrass me, but I think he was just really could not understand the idea that other things besides dicks could go into female bodies.
Well, and that kind of reminds me of my dad's reaction to Carrie, of just like my dad, an adult man, was with his young daughter laughing at boobs, and he was like, and he specifically remember saying bush. Like, it was so, and like, to me, and when I was that age, I was giggling. I'm like, haha, pubic hair. Like, I didn't fucking know. I was a child. And it's just so interesting now to watch it and just be like, you fell into the trap. This trap of this like very slow, like creepy, slow, like romantic teenage girls in the locker room, like, obviously trying to kind of play with that kind of weird, the male gaze in this situation. Like, they're just so gross. And he played right into it. And it's just incredibly frustrating when I reflect upon that experience and how, like, I think I missed the point at that age too. And like, I was also probably like 11 or 12. So it would have gone over my head anyway. But it was just like, I never thought about the other characters as anything other than like boobs and bush, like throughout the entire movie, which is horrible that happened. Yeah. And
I think that if, I mean, I get it. I mean, now as an adult woman, and knowing, like, honestly really loving, that kind of Brian De Palma era, where there were a lot of like boobs and bushes. Yeah. But also thinking about, that was supposed to be a 16-year-old girl, you know, who were looking at her boobs. I mean, I think that, bringing up this film was also not to say like, I mean, I definitely called it a masterpiece earlier and I stand by that. I mean, I'm also allowed to say like, it's, if I were to have done that, and I would never redo it, but I do think that there are ways to, to talk about to portray a naked girl in the shower, and a naked 16-year-old girl in the shower who started her period for the first time, and not necessarily have that actor who wasn't, Sissy Spacek was not 16 when she made it,
right.
But to not sort of have someone else watching it like sexualize or like get aroused by like what they perceive as a 16-year-old girl, I mean, and I think that so I, I mean, yeah, but that's also why I wanted to talk about it, because I think that there's ways to unpack this film as a woman, as a filmmaker, as an image maker, in 2020, in 2021, right. Et cetera, within the kind of Brian De Palma catalog, within, but also knowing like, well, I don't know, like, boobs are fine. Boobs are just a thing. It doesn't like boobs don't have to be sexual, even on a 16-year-old girl, like why is that the case? And maybe the combination of like a wet, still scrawny, 16-year-old who's having her period, like those two things, maybe that's like a real conflation of actually what that body is, that it's actually not sexual, that it like that body bleeds. And if you find if you find a female bleeding body disgusting, well, that's what female bodies do. That's what those cute, perky boobs do. Or that's the bodies that belong to those perky little boobs do too.
Yeah. Yeah. Every time I'm glad to hear this conversation, because every time I watch this, I'm always kind of skeeved out, but also questioning whether I should be skeeved out about this opening scene, because you're right. There is nothing inherently sexual about, a woman walking around naked. That we need to get out of our head that is an inherently sexual thing.
Right. She's taking a shower after gym.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. But the way it is filmed with the one of the things that I think Brian De Palma does really interesting, particularly in this film, is the way that he uses music to kind of set a different tone than what might be happening on screen. And this is the moment where it kind of gets me at the very beginning, because it plays like it is romanticized. It plays like it is sort of Edenic or sexual. And when Carrie is washing herself, it almost feels like it's something that she's doing a sexual deed in the shower. And then of course she bleeds. And so it takes that turn from that moment. But so every time I watch this, I'm combated with like, is this very male gazy, or am I projecting onto it? And so there's I don't know, it's weird.
I think it is male gazy. I think you're absolutely right. But I wonder if I also wonder because, thinking about that kind of that De Palma era, not that there was even that had been that term might have been invented, but maybe not unpacked to the point where it is right now. But it also feels like it's so, oh my God, it's so overdetermined, right? The kind of the camera moving through this like steamy locker room, and girls, with their knee up on a bench, kind of, arching their backs and whatnot as they like put on their, pedestrian clothes after gym practice or whatever. And that music that's still so kind of soft porn music. And I think, if it's thought of kind of in parallel to something specifically like, Body Double, which also really is this kind of plays on the male gaze directly. It totally directly plays on the male gaze, both in real life, with this kind of like, voyeur, and in terms of, like porn production, I mean, God, I would, I would love to talk to Brian De Palma about, his take on feminism and the male gaze. Cause I think it absolutely is male gazy, but I also think it's like, it's so like determined and kind of mapped out as such that it feels like it kind of doubles in on itself. And there's a little bit of irony maybe, but I also think that this is a film that's not a parody. It's not irony. Again, it's like, I just think I think it's complicated. And, having said that, it's not a film that I would show my 9-year-old,
Right.
to be like, this is a film I love. I think you should see it. I mean, but where there's other films that are maybe more with more jump scares or more decapitations that I can explain to him because he knows that's not real. I mean, there's something about Carrie that's like it's a real horror film, but it also really is, it gets real. And the 76 iteration of it is complicated in terms of, this kind of who's watching who. It's a conundrum, and it's something that I like to watch both sometimes as a, something kind of, fun on a Friday night, like I'll watch Carrie again, or also something that I will watch earnestly for a conversation like this, which can also be a kind of a fun, like, let's just, let's talk freely about it, or something that I've definitely, shown in, a screenwriting class that I teach at a Research One university, where like, let's really unpack this film in terms of how it's written and how it's shot. Split diopter.
Yes.
And all, it's complicated. And it's really is like when people ask me, and I get asked this a lot, kind of like, what are some formative horror films? And I always say, Hitchcock's Rebecca, which I dearly love. I say Carrie and Rosemary's Baby, which goddamn, Rosemary's Baby is also very fucking problematic. I mean, if we, I mean, as a film that's kind of perfect, but that comes from a director who is the farthest thing from perfect that we can talk about, and I could go on. But I also think that's what I like about being someone who is not just the maker of films, but someone who watches a lot of films and tries to unpack my relationship with those films.
There's two things that I definitely want to talk about. I want to talk about the art behind this film with split diopters and everything, because I think the filmmaking is incredible. But another thing that popped in my head as I was watching this, and I was kind of curious about if this, because you both saw it at sort of formative times of your life, this movie made me terrified about locker rooms.
Fuck locker rooms. Sorry.
Yeah, seriously.
Because and I didn't have the words for it, but as a gay kid growing up, the idea of the locker room felt dangerous to me because there, we see stuff like in Carrie where there's a lot of people, they're just in movies, they're just walking around naked, and there's violence implied with what happens to her. And I was so terrified going into high school in particular, with the locker room situation, because I was like trying to understand my attraction to men at the same time of knowing that like this is a place full of hyper masculinity in particular for the male locker room, that like, this movie, I'm kind of wondering if it sort of like was like that kind of clue of like, this is dangerous. This is where violence can happen to you, because it happened to Carrie.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was terrified of locker rooms because of this movie. I was terrified of having to go to gym class. I got my boobs early, like in 5th grade, which was a scary prospect for everybody, including myself, because my bully told all the boys I wore a bra. And the boys were very weird to me because I had a bra. It's like the dumbest logic of all time, like ever. But like that was my reality in 5th grade, where like everyone knew I wore a bra, and I was so embarrassed. And I was so embarrassed of my body and like having a body. And I was made fun of a lot by other girls. So like the locker room was my worst fucking nightmare. Like nothing bad ever happened, but there was always giggles. And like I was taller than everybody else. And like it was just not. And like Carrie did not make me excited for it either, because it wasn't. I was terrified of having to take a shower. I never shower. Like we didn't take showers. Like it was weird. It was like no one uses the actual locker room showers in my locker room in high school. But like that was my worst nightmare, was like having to take a shower. And I thought that was going to happen to me. I never did, but like it was a huge anxiety of mine going into gym class.
Also for me, because I've always been overweight. And so the fact that like I was going into this place with like a lot of fit people, and in movies and everything I saw, the overweight kid is always the brunt of the jokes. And that was my bullying moment, was always in elementary school and in junior high. Was always my weight. And so I was like, I'm going into a place that is not only dangerous for queer people, even though I didn't quite know that term yet, but I knew there was something different, but also because of my appearance. And so it was like, yes, locker room's terrifying, locker room's horrific. I never wanted to have to shower in front of someone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I mean, I hear you so much. And I think I think there could be, again, like a whole nother essay on kind of like locker room films, and then like locker room films, like fictional films, and then actual locker room stories and actual, it's funny, Facebook does like memories. This happened, whatever, how many years ago. And I feel like it was just the memories that have been popping up are, when Trump was on that bus with, it wasn't Ryan Seacrest. It was the other guy who
Billy
was
something.
Yeah, where he was like, you just grab him by the pussy. That sort of moment. And it turned into kind of like, it's just locker room talk, this kind of a thing. Yeah. And then like a host of actual, kind of athletes posting things from locker rooms. Like there was a clip of like, and this is not to say that this is anything that's kind of like, oh, see, this is what they do, but it was like some Chicago Cubs, Cuban players like dancing in the locker room or some, whatever. And it was just like so it's been kind of on my mind again, literally that kind of locker room talk, what happens in a locker room. And the idea that there were no adults really. I mean, the coaches didn't come in, the teachers didn't come in. It was usually kind of underground and smelled bodily, And, I never took a shower in high school, and eventually I was on the swim team, and then we did take showers, like together, and but it felt like something kind of different. We were a team and we were all, no one cared about the swimmers. Somehow it was just like, I don't know. There was something different, and we all saw each other in swimsuits at like 5:00 in the morning, and we would practice. We didn't have a pool at the high school, so we practiced at like the indoor kind of YMCA pool, which was also kind of weird. And there was so many levels of weirdness to being on the swim team in Central Ohio, where I grew up, that we were all just kind of this like band of misfits, and but yeah, I think that's I've mentioned my children. I have my 2 older children are in high school, and they're both playing football this season, which is such a strange thing for me to experience too, as like a football mom.
You don't give me football mom, but I love it.
Oh my God. I'm gonna send you guys pictures of, it was senior night this past Friday, and, my God. They're really like, one of them is like the captain of the team, but he's also got the heart of, a poet,
Oh yeah.
I really the younger one is kind of wily, not in a way that he's bullying, I think, by any means, but in a way that is just like kind of I feel proud. I feel proud of his wiliness as a football player. But I get curious, to also think about what their experiences are like now as and it's an all boys, team. And although they announced at senior night on Friday, they announced the middle school team, and there's a bunch of girls on the middle school team also, and I'm just like, who frankly look like little baby dykes, which I totally adore, and I'm just like, oh, it's so beautiful. But also, I just think, right now, maybe high school is different. I mean, both of the ones who are in high school have a whole group of friends, some of who are out as, non-binary, many of whom are out as bisexual or, queer or whatever. I mean, and I think when I was in high school, you sort of like knew who you were, or you knew who your friends were. But it wasn't, we didn't have like, a Demi Lovato or a Halsey, or we could go on and on with much more interesting examples of people who are kind of like
or a Little Nas.
And exactly, or like Billy Porter. I mean, my God, or even sort of like Harry Styles and his fabulous whatever, who still might be a problematic, public figure. But anyway, I just think that, yeah, I think, the locker room, that environment, in that, like that space within a space of like the high school genre within a horror genre in terms of filmmaking is like, woo, I mean, you could set a whole super scary movie around social agendas, just within a locker room.
It's so weird because you could do that and you can also set a porn in it. Like it's such a weird area of like
right.
hyperaggression, hypersexuality. It's such a microcosm. It's so,
and intimacy. I think it's like, I think that what we don't do well enough, and you can't do it when you're actually in that place, is talk about that kind of space of adolescence, which is probably why I have made so many films about the era of adolescence, because it's just fascinating to me. It's a time of like where I like to think that coming of age is a lifelong process, and there's all sorts of ways that we can evolve as humans. But there's not another time when you're both equally like super confused about the facts.
Yep.
And super confused about where intimacy is, because you go from like having slumber parties with all your best friends where you're all piled on top of each other as puppies and it's not sexual, it's just intimate, to having it turn sexual because all of a sudden you have hormones and different nerves have different, like your body is a living thing, That was that was profound. Your body is a living thing. Put that on a t-shirt. But it's like very profound, and your parents, you also, I think that we all now, like I said, my mom's 90 and, I still tease her sometimes. I'm just like, what were you thinking not talking to me about what your napkins were in your closet? Come on, like what were you doing with that or whatever? And even, my own children my oldest who's 17, I can tease him a little bit, about, I don't know, just the things that, his sort of, like he told me the other day, he was like in the shower and I had to come in to get something. And he was in the shower and he like was covering up his, the goods, so to say. And I just was like, I made that. Like, what is the problem? And he was like, Mama, and he was so serious. He was like, Mama, I have to tell you, every time that you've said that for my entire life, it's the creepiest thing you say to me. And I was like, what, did I remind you that my body made your body? He was like, I don't like it. I don't like it. I mean, he really has such a good sense of humor, but somehow like that crossed a line for him, that I reminded him that my body made his body. And I was like, oh, I get it. For me, it's funny, but also maybe a loving thing. Like, my body made your body. I love you so much. And he is just like, I don't want to think about that. Like that I came out of you. Let's just, I am not listening. I am not listening. I can't
strike
hear.
That.
Yeah. It's so curious. And so anyway, I just think there's like, the layers have layers in terms of, of adolescence. And, I love teen films so much. And I love, bloody films. I love a bullying vengeance film. And I think that Carrie, has all of that. And I dearly have always loved, Sissy Spacek, who's still in her 80s, looks like a child on some level.
She does.
And I kind of love the weird provenance of someone like John Travolta. And I love, that Nancy Allen had, a relationship with Brian De Palma and was in Blowout and was in, she was also in, maybe she's also in Dress to Kill. I don't know. It's just like it's a perfect little problematic masterpiece of a film for me that just checks all of the boxes, both as someone who loves films and someone who makes films.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. Well, do we want to wrap this up and give this film a rating out of 5?
That sounds good to me.
So, Terry, how many split diopters out of 5 do you give Carrie?
I truly do think this movie is a masterpiece. I think from a technical level, we barely even skim the surface on the talent on screen or behind the screen with the use of split diopters, with the use of split screen, with the fact that the iconic shot of Carrie drenched in blood, and it is split screen, so we are forced to focus on her rage as well as the stuff that she is doing. The fact that is what's happening, and the playfulness where the screen moves over to the left and now there's another scene. Just, it's such a It's such a fantastic movie that uses music in such an interesting way to kind of play against type. The slow motion walk up to the stage is like supposed to be in any other movie would be like the romantic triumph. She's all of that, the sort of like frumpy, and I'm using that in quotations, girl becomes the, the swan and becomes like the homecoming queen. It's that. And then it completely reverses that with the psycho screen, strikes that kind of implement the horror elements. It's just this movie it's so good, and every time I watch it, I'm always surprised at how good it is, even though I've seen it, I don't know, a dozen times in my life. So for me, this is 5 split diopters. Just give them to me. Fill this movie up with them and make a movie that is only split diopters, please, Brian De Palma. Like, I love it. What about you, Mary Beth?
I also give this 5 split diopters out of 5. I think every time I see this, I have a deeper appreciation for it and of how sad it is as I have grown up and just kind of more experiences of existing as a woman in the world. I feel like this movie takes on even more meaning. We didn't get to talk about my favorite scene, which was that scene walking through, like, up to the stage, and the way it's this beautiful kind of like beautiful string scene, and then you cut to the pig's blood and cut back, and you just know a tragedy is about to happen, and you can't do anything to stop it, and it's just, I don't know, it's an incredible piece of filmmaking that I think is always surprising that, like you said, Jennifer, was written by a man and directed by a man, but seems to capture the experience of being a bullied teenage girl in such an interesting way, and it also deals with trauma in a weird, I don't know. There's just so much going on in this movie, and every time I watch it, I love it even more. So definitely 5 out of 5. Jennifer, you have the final word.
Well, I mean, I hope it goes without saying that I am a 5. A 5.
I figured.
Or I'm like a 6 out of 5, or like I'm a split, of it. But I think it's, I think that it is, again, to sort of like bring up that kind of De Palma, roster, I think it feels on the one hand, like really of that De Palma world, but also kind of singular in the way that it also treats, adolescence. And, I think it could easily be, a film that is a segue into a conversation around bullying or menstruation or, religious fanaticism or small town creep or locker room creep, or, I think we could go sort of on and on, or even a kind of, no means no. I mean, I brought up earlier the scene with Nancy Allen and John Travolta where she kind of leans in to kiss him and then pulls away and he's frustrated and I don't know, just the kind of those dynamics. And, I think, Piper Laurie in this film is just extraordinary as this fanatical mother who at some point we realize that her fanaticism is also potentially trying to protect her own daughter from being a teen mother like she was, which I think is not actually in real life an uncommon kind of backfire, that women who want to do this thing, or parents who want to, or mentors, older adult mentors who want to protect younger people against the mistakes that they made, make the mistake of like pushing them actually right onto the path of what happened to them. I mean, this is a film that's on the one hand, like super entertaining, which was meant to be entertaining. It was nominated. There's Academy Award nominations involved. It was commercially super successful. It's deep. And the last thing that I'll say is that I remember reading an article, by a woman named Joanna Frew, who was she's passed away now, but she was like kind of a media theoretician. And she actually wrote, an essay about how fascinating she thought it was that Mel Gibson, was, appeared in so many of his films, like covered in blood. And she always thought that was a kind of a feminist image because he looked like a child who had just emerged from the birth canal, which I had never sort of thought about.
Interesting. Yeah.
I mean, having had 3 vaginal births, let's just put it on out there. I mean, babies are pretty gross and disgusting when they're first born. And I kind of love thinking now about that final image of Carrie at the prom. And like, it's kind of full circle. She goes from like, and I don't No, this is maybe the question I would ask Brian De Palma, is like, was there an idea to sort of start with Carrie starting her period and then end where she seems like she's, she's drenched in blood as though she's like emerged from the, from like the birth canal. That's a little bit maybe too deep, but it's, how often do us humans, no matter how you were born, we all emerged into this world like covered in blood. I mean, that's actually factual. And there's something that seems really interesting to me, to consider that image of Carrie covered in blood, but actually all images of people in horror films in particular covered in blood. And to think about that as some sort of existential little ding.
Yeah.
Yeah. 5 out of 5 for me.
Or is that, diopter, so it's actually 10? Is that,
maybe. Yeah, you're right. Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you so much, Jennifer, for joining us to talk about Carrie. Where can our listeners find you, and what do you have coming up that you can share, if anything?
So, again, I would say, check out my Vimeo page. It's just under Jennifer Reeder. I don't know that there are other Jennifer Reeders in the world, but I don't think there are any other who have a bunch of films on Vimeo. I've got also some shorts on the Criterion channel. And Knives and Skin is still on Hulu, I believe.
It is.
Signature Move is on Showtime, actually.
Mm-hmm.
VHS 94 has just launched off Shudder.
Very successfully. Oh my goodness. Like the biggest premiere on Shudder of all time. And it was a New York Times, critics pick and all that wacky stuff. I'm in post-production for a film called Night's End, which is a feature-length film that involves no teenage girls at all, but a monster. I'll say that. I was able to, for the first time, to build a creature in a film, which was super fun. We shot that here in Chicago over the summer. It also happens to be a Shudder original. So look for another Shudder original coming from me. And then in 2022, March of 2022, I launched into production for kind of a proper follow-up to Knives and Skin, which is a kind of a coming-of-age, nuanced shapeshifter, think kind of a coming-of-age cat people. Oh. Hell yeah.
And that's one that the Night's End I didn't write, but a very good friend of mine wrote and I directed. That's the one that's coming out on Shudder pretty, like at the sort of maybe mid-May through 2022. And then, Perpetrator I wrote, and we'll direct. And I can't say yet who's attached, but there's like this incredible cast and, incredible team behind it. And, it's not related to the world of Knives and Skin. So when I say follow up, I just mean that it's like, actually, it's like a full genre film. It just kind of like takes some of the things, some of the themes visually even that, I dealt with in Knives and Skin and amps that up. But it's, it's a really, from my perspective, it's I feel really great about it. And it's kind of this sense of, when I was touring around with Knives and Skin, and even before Knives and Skin, I was always getting asked, like, in Q&As, for instance, or like press conversations, people would say like, God, how is it working with all those teenage girls? And I realized that, they think it's like working with a pack of Wolverines, they think it's awful,
Right.
Like, because I was always like, great, it's awesome, but they were asking like, God, how is it to work with all those teenage girls? And so it took me not that long to realize like, oh, right, we're a culture obsessed with youth and beauty, especially among young women, and we fucking hate young women. And, so I wanted to make a film that was a proper genre film, super entertaining, lots of kind of, blood, enough gore for me, or, and that was really also about, about our obsession with youth and beauty among young women and how much we hate them, and what happens when a girl who you call wild and out of control as an insult, right? Like, you're wild and out of control. And then she actually becomes wild and out of control.
Oh,
Cool.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
So anyway, that's called Perpetrator, and I'm shooting that top of 2022. So, so look out for that.
Hell yeah.
Cool.
And in the meantime, I'm just football momming it out here in,
I love your Instagram page.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, if you want to see, also you can follow me on Instagram under the Jennifer Reader, and you can see updates on what I'm working on, and you can see pictures of my footballers.
Cool.
Hell yeah.
So, listeners, you've heard from us, but we want to hear from you. What was your experience with Carrie? You can send us an email at scarredforlifepodcast@gmail.com or reach out to us directly on Twitter. I am at MB McAndrews.
And I'm McGailey Dreadful.
And of course, don't forget to follow the podcast on Twitter at Scarred Podcast.
And please don't forget to review, rate, and subscribe.
Thank you to Eric Power for our artwork. Thank you to Sean Keller for our music. Thank you everyone for listening. Please stay safe out there, but most importantly, stay creepy.
And until next time.
Somebody please think of the children! Somebody please think of the children! Somebody please think of the children!
As a person with a very deep voice, I'm hired all the time for advertising campaigns. But a deep voice doesn't sell B2B, and advertising on the wrong platform doesn't sell B2B either. That's why if you're a B2B marketer, you should use LinkedIn ads. LinkedIn has the targeting capabilities to help you reach the world's largest professional audience. That's right, over 70 million decision makers all in one place. All the big wigs, then medium wigs, also small wigs who are on the path to becoming big wigs. Okay, that's enough about wigs. LinkedIn ads allows you to focus on getting your B2B message to the right people. So, does that mean you should use ads on LinkedIn instead of hiring me, the man with the deepest voice in the world? Yes. Yes, it does. Get started today and see why LinkedIn is the place to be to be. We'll even give you a $100 credit on your next campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
What is The Briefing Room?
It's a behind-the-scenes look at how the criminal justice system works and the lives of the people within that system.
If you love true crime, well, these are the real people who do the job every day of making sure justice is served.
Hi, I'm Detective Dave.
I'm Detective Dan. Together, we have decades of experience in local law enforcement, a profession that we think is often misunderstood.
So we're going to explore how to do it right, and we won't shy away from when it's done wrong. These are stories you'll hear nowhere else. Unique, frank, and unvarnished.
From the team that brought you Small Town Dicks, this is The Briefing Room. Episode 1 drops on August 30th. We'll meet you in the briefing room.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.